Susan Engel is curious about curiosity, especially how little kids invent, play with ideas, ask really interesting questions, and generally get a kick out of figuring stuff out. She wants to know how and why they do these things, and how and why we adults, particularly teachers, can support their thinking, but often fail to do so. A long time ago, she was a second-grade teacher. For many years, she's sat at the intersection of progressive education and developmental psychology at Williams College in Massachusetts. Her books include The Hungry Mind, The End of the Rainbow, and now published December 2025 by University of Chicago Press, American Kindergarten. A truly interesting conversation with Susan Engel about curiosity in kids on this episode of Kohn Zone. I'm Alfie Kohn. So, Susan Engel, talk to us about the idea of curiosity. Most people have an intuitive sense of what it means without having defined it crisply. The idea of wanting to know more about the world, and a sense that it's a good thing and it's pretty common, especially among young children. If I'm right about the common wisdom, what about the common wisdom might not be right?
Great question. A couple of things. First of all, I think the common wisdom is sort of superficial. That is, people, if you ask them, for instance, we did some research where we asked people what they thought was important in school-age children. Teachers would say curiosity if you asked them. If you said, is it important for your students to be curious? They'd say, oh, yes.
Right.
But in a separate part of that survey, we asked people, list the 5 most important characteristics in your students that you hope to nurture or support. No one ever said curiosity. So people passively endorse it. Nobody would say, no, it's not good. Nobody in our society would say, no, it's not good to be curious. But that's a long way from thinking it's so important that you have to pay attention to it, that you have to cultivate it, that you have to worry if you see it diminishing over time. So that's one way in which the common wisdom isn't what it seems. People don't actually actively embrace it the way that they think they do.
But do they embrace something similar to it, like intrinsic motivation or inquiry or play?
I would give the same answer to that. I think that many people, and here I'm thinking mostly of parents and many educators, but I think in the general population the same. They endorse these things sort of mildly. But if push came to shove and you said, do a little less math drill and a little more playtime. I mean, I can tell you about this later if it comes up about my work in kindergartens in the last few years. There's just no one thinks it's as important as some other thing that they think is more important, like math skills, for instance. And I would say that's true about play. I think it's true about exploration. And just to go back to the curiosity piece, I mean, one of the interesting things, one of the fundamental sort of benefits of the last 15 years of research on curiosity is that we understand that you said the urge to know more. Psychologists talk increasingly about the urge to close the information gap. So it's so amazing that humans, and even especially young children, are capable at some level, even if they're not aware of it, of noticing the difference between what they expect and what's just come across their, come in front of them, happened. And the urge to close that information gap results, when you do it, it feels good.
You don't have a problem with that description? That doesn't seem to you a little reductive or narrowly cognitive or something like that?
Well, Good question, Alfie. It depends on the context in which we're talking. So for research purposes, it's very helpful. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
So in the really challenging effort to figure out how to measure curiosity, because just to go back to what you said in the beginning, I think most people feel that they know curiosity when they see it,
Mm-hmm.
and they know it when they feel it. I think the trick there is they don't always in reality, and for different reasons. They may confuse curiosity in the child with obedience or eagerness to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way they might get mistaken. And another way is you don't always know when you feel curious. You're not always aware of it. Sometimes and we know this because mice and rats act curious, but we can't assume they know what it feels like when they're curious. And so a behavioral account of that is very useful for measurements. So, for instance, Jamie Giroux and originally David Clark, two psychologists, came up with this cool thing called the fish task, where you say to a kid, you're in a submarine. I think it was a computer game, and some fish are going to float by the window, and it could be one fish or it could be 10. How many different kinds of fish would you like to see? And kids can tell the researcher, I want to see 2, I want to see 4. And they take that as a measure of individual differences in curiosity. It doesn't explain every kind of curious experience, and it doesn't capture everything about a kid, but it's a really nice way of measuring individual differences in curiosity in a particular group of people, in this case, kids. So I think for research, a reductive, or I would say precise and shareable, a scientist can try to replicate each other's work or say, well, I used that task, but I also added elements of stress or non-stress in the situation, and I found this. I think that's very useful. Do I think that's reductive in a school setting? Yeah.
Do you have measures like this proven to be valid in that they correlate with curiosity in other domains? How do we know it's not just that some kids are more interested in fish?
We don't totally, although Jamie Drew and other people are trying to extend it to other kinds of stimuli. And to your point, very early in life, children develop interests,
Yeah.
and God knows most adults have interests. So you can ask me all the questions you want about cars. I will never be able to answer one of them because I am so profoundly disinterested in cars.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me anything new about cooking, and I will want to know more, and I will remember it.
So we could talk about curiosity as, I think you used the term, specific versus diversive. So, right, some people are curious only or mostly about specific things, and other people have a general orientation toward the world of wanting to know more about stuff, about themselves, right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Oh, totally true. But I would say there's pretty good evidence that above and beyond that, I don't know if it's above, but in addition to that, some people have just a higher level of curiosity. I mean, imagine in a magical world where you could actually find the thing that interests each kid most or each adult most. And then using that, you could do a version of the fish task. For you, it could be bread making. For me, it could be cake making. I think I know you make bread, and I love to bake desserts. So I would put money on the fact that even if you found the thing that interests each person most, some people would be more voracious in their hunt for more information, more alert to information gaps, more quickly hungry again. Think of it in terms of appetite. Everybody gets hungry, but some people have a bigger appetite than others, and some people get full and then get hungry again very quickly. That's the very curious person. So both dimensions are true. Everybody has specific interests, and some people's diversive interests is at a higher level than another person. But even if you found the specific thing that each person was curious about, people would have there would be individual variation in what the high is.
So that's sort of a vertical measure.
Yes.
And then there's also a horizontal measure, meaning across different situations and topics. And then we might also think about in terms of it being more reactive or proactive. Like everybody's got reactive curiosity. If there are two people whispering over there, I want to know what they're talking about. But proactive means, I come up with new things to be curious about.
Absolutely, yes. And I think this is a really important topic because too much of research on curiosity has imagined the child as this sort of passive recipient. Something happens and I'm surprised, and then I want to reduce my uncertainty by learning more about it, getting more comfortable with it. But very quickly, but not necessarily for everybody to the same degree, we generate our own information gaps. And the more you know about something, this is something I've written about, the deeper you go into a topic that you're interested in, the subtler your questions can be because you become aware. I mean, I experienced this talking to you because we're both genuinely interested and thoughtful about this topic. So when you said horizontal and vertical, my mind started racing. I loved that idea, by the way, of thinking of those two as horizontal and vertical, those two dimensions. And I started to think, how could you make a 4-part grid where you could identify? And I was distracted while we were talking, but I was also generating a new thing to be curious about. And very quickly, this is what makes it so cool. Very quickly, it's not always about getting new information from the world around you. It can be that you're reducing your own information gap or your uncertainty or whatever you want to call it by searching around in your drawer of knowledge, which might be deep. You hope it's a deep drawer, for things that you already know that might help you make sense of what you don't know. And this is something Jerome Bruner talked about in 1959 in The Process of Education, using what you already know to think about something you don't yet know.
Bruner also said that without limits, it can start to resemble distractibility, but that's a different topic. Right.
But that's totally true. Where did he say that? Well, later maybe you'll tell me where I can find it.
I'll find the reference for you, yeah. But I guess psychology for decades operated on the basis of the idea that we are basically just need-satisfying creatures. And when there's something that moves us off our comfort level, we want to get back to that sense of stasis, the homeostasis model. So I'm interested in the extent to which curiosity is about that. I'm a little agitated because I need to know this and I don't know it. So curiosity is about figuring it out to reduce the information gap.
Right.
But that's very different than a model of curiosity that's non-homeostatic, that says, I want to go out of my way to make myself a little uncomfortable, to figure out new stuff that I don't know. Do you see it as more homeostatic or non-homeostatic?
Yes.
Both.
Both.
For different people?
I think the relationship between those two things varies from one person to another. But I think hunger is a perfectly reasonable comparison. So is sex for some people. Once they're older, which is you want more, then you get sated, then you want more. And that cycle feels good. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not a snacker. I don't like to snack, but I love to eat. And part of the reason I don't like to snack is because I love to be really hungry when I eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm full, but then before you know it, I'm thinking about the next meal or the next thing I'm going to cook. And I think actually, you might say, and I think there's good research to support this, that for kids who diversive curiosity is too high and too jumping around,
Mm-hmm.
they can't experience true satisfaction, satiation. Is that the word? Satiation?
Mm-hmm.
Of their curiosity because they're busy looking for another thing to make them stimulated, to make them curious, and they don't experience the kind of quiet part where you think,
Hmm.
oh, good, I know that now. Oh, that's interesting. Let me think about it. Or, oh, let me connect that to some other things. Um, so for many people, but not all people, both are true, that you are seeking to some kind of homeostasis, but then you kind of also want to know new things. You keep generating new things. And I know very little about evolution, except my youngest son is an evolutionary biologist. And I do think that cycle is very adaptive. Um,
Hmm.
the sort of, the ebb and flow of homeostasis and then kind of hungry
You mean for the individual or for the species?
for the species.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But don't ask me to go further than that because
No, I
I
won't.
really, I'm very tentative about applying evolutionary theory to behavior in a simplistic way.
Yeah.
But there's nothing surprising to me about the idea that we seek change and homeostasis.
Do you think only a small proportion of people, including children, have that kind of proactive and across the board sense of curiosity on many topics and a desire to figure stuff out that's not about tension reduction? Or do you, I mean, if you assigned a numerical value of that version of curiosity, do you see it as like in a bell curve or how?
Wait a minute, what if I assign a number to what
The
aspect of
extent of
curiosity?
curiosity that is not limited to a particular topic, not merely reactive. Um, they want to see a lot of fish and they want to learn a lot of new things. Um, and that's their, it's more trait than state. Is are all of us moderately like that? Only a few people a lot like that, or what?
Well, this is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? So infants, almost all typically developing infants, are very curious a lot of the
Right.
time. I mean, intensely curious, and that's true also of toddlers. Although
Hmm.
by then some are preoccupied by some other characteristic of their life. They're too hungry too much of the time, or they're too afraid too much of the time. But generally speaking, lots of toddlers are very curious,
Hmm.
and there's every reason for them to be because they're trying to make a lot of what's unfamiliar familiar because they're
Hmm.
new to the world.
Hmm.
They're trying to learn about everything they can, um, and that's why they ask a million questions and they touch every object within their reach and they put things in their mouths that we can't believe they're putting in their mouths and all of those things. I think what I claimed in my book, The Hungry Mind, is that begins to wane for many. And I think there are two reasons why it does. You've already touched on them. One is that most people become a little more selective in what they're curious about, and the everyday world becomes more familiar to them. So you don't have to go on being surprised and fascinated every time you hear the door open, because you begin to learn that if it's at the end of the day, it's probably your parent or your grandma or your sibling or whatever. And every time you see a dog, you're not like, oh my God, what is that? You know, it's a dog. So the world becomes more familiar. That's one thing. And the person, the child, develops some very specific interests
Hmm.
that, fish is not your thing, but put
Right.
dinosaurs in there or whatever, or machines, and you want to see a lot. So that's one reason for an apparent waning to some degree. It would be strange. I mean, imagine the 30-year-old, or God knows, people our age, old, who have the curiosity of a 2-year-old. We wouldn't get anything done, and we'd be exhausting to be around. And we wouldn't be able to go deep into anything because we'd be so distracted by all the other things. I can imagine somebody with more knowledge about online behavior thinking that looking at Instagram all day long. I might be going out too far here on a twig, but it's encouraging a form of not good diversive curiosity. You want to know a little about a million things and you stop going deep. However, I think there's another reason that's not built in and sort of adaptive. I think all of that is sort of inevitable, that nobody retains the omnivorous curiosity of the 2-year-old. Everybody gets more selective. Within that selection, as I already said, some people are going to be more curious, that is, less satisfied with stopping after they know a little. I wrote about it. I mentioned it. I never forgot this in my book, The Hungry Mind. I mentioned this person who was an historian, who wrote about research rapture, which is the excitement, the ecstatic feeling you have as you learn more and more about a topic you're dying to know more about. I don't know that everybody or the majority of people go on experiencing research rapture as they get older.
And you have less chance to experience it if you're using AI to do your research for you, but that's another episode.
Well, yes, the AI part might be another episode, but the less chance part is this episode, which is that when kids get to school, they don't have the same kind of opportunity or encouragement to feed their appetite for knowledge.
I want to talk more about that and what happens in school. But that's
just to say that's a reason why it wanes. That's a reason why 8-year-olds are not like 2-year-olds. That's not as inevitable as the reasons I've already mentioned.
And the reason you already mentioned helps me to understand something I don't think I saw before, which is if we see the pure state of early childhood curiosity and then this reduction, we see it, or maybe I saw it as sort of an unfortunate tendency to lose a lovely gift that all humans start out with. But maybe what you're saying is that for little kids, it's a have-to curiosity. It's like you need to eat in order to learn what these things are that keep showing up in the world. And that sort of puts a hand on the scale, artificially inflating the extent of the curiosity we see in the beginning of life. And after a while, we can be looking at this autonomous, chosen, proactive version, a purer version of curiosity that's not just about, I need to fill up my stomach. It's about enjoying the subtleties of taste. And only later in life can we see how much of that there is.
Bingo. I mean, and I think the thing that fascinates me, that is this new project I'm working on, is the space in early childhood, this sort of little pathway between the need to fill up your stomach and the total delight of satisfying your interest. You asked me about people's the common wisdom that curiosity was good and the way in which they might not get it right. One thing that I think most people don't get right is that in childhood, it's not a stable individual difference. That is, it's an individual difference that reflects environment. And so it's not in this, many teachers don't know that they think this, but if you probe in interviews or experiments like I've done, they kind of assume that their students are either curious or they're not. They don't see it as something that can be an educational goal that they can help children fulfill. So that's one, I think, misconception that most people have, that it's it's like how flexible your muscles are, how tall you are. It's sort of built in. There's nothing you can do about it. But that's not the case. So that's one thing I want to say. The other is that one thing we haven't talked about that does explain some of the very stable individual differences in appetite for knowledge is temperament. Because if you're very startled by new experiences, and we know from Jerome Kagan and Nathan Fox and a lot of cool research, if then your need for knowledge is going to be sort of it's going to be tempered by your fear of novelty.
Let's talk about what classrooms do. Now, you went early on to measure individual differences in kids' curiosity, and you found something depressing.
I did. So soon after I realized I really wanted to study curiosity and that it mattered. I mean, I do want to say that my interest in curiosity started with conversations with teachers who were saying how much they valued it and how they valued it more than they valued some of the things that they were being forced to measure in their students, like math facts or whatever. But I heard in what they were saying a kind of an embrace of the notion of curiosity without any clear articulated notion of what their role was in encouraging it or what might make it, flourish or not, it being the process of curiosity. So I just want to give credit to the wonderful teachers who first led me to this line of research. And I was so naive. I thought, okay, I'm going to go into schools and I'm going to watch and count where are kids acting curious. And I'm going to see what makes the difference. Is it girls versus boys? Is it the block center versus the math table? And lo and behold, we couldn't identify which areas led to the most questions or the most gazing. And we couldn't figure out if it was more girls or boys or more anything because we saw so few expressions of curiosity. And we saw shockingly few in kindergarten. And we saw even more shockingly fewer in third grade. So there was almost, and we really sampled these classrooms for solid periods of time and across the classroom because we kept looking for ways to compare this area with that area, this period of the day with that period of the day, but nothing to compare because to your point, what was so disappointing is we saw such a small amount of curiosity. And I should add that other researchers, Gordon Wells, Tizard, and Hughes, people who have studied children at home in the early years, say between 3 and 5, know that right before kids it's not just an across the board developmental change. Like, oh yeah, by the time you're 6, you're not curious. Because when kids are studied at home, even a month before they start school, they're asking a ton of questions.
So how do some teachers, I'll get to why in a minute, which we've already started talking about, but how do teachers or how does school end up shutting down and discouraging that curiosity?
Well, so many ways. The biggest way, I guess I would put it today with you, is to overscript the day. And there's been such a big push to script the school day. And to refer again to Bruner, he said there's no more such a thing as a teacher-proof curriculum as there is a parent-proof family. And so one of the reasons for scripts is to, in some way, ensure that no matter how good or weak or whatever distracted the teacher is, kids are all going to put quotes around get the same education. And the problem with that is, there are many problems with that. I could spend a whole lot of time talking to you about that. But one problem is it doesn't leave much room for a kid to pursue what spontaneously taps into their curiosity. And the most obvious ways that happens is you're rushing from one task to another, you, the kid, but also the teacher. And, I in my book on kindergarten that's coming out this winter, I watched teachers, many teachers, and I'm not blaming the teachers at all. It's the system. They're on a timer. They say
Right.
2 minutes more for this time and 2 minutes more for this. And now the bell goes off. And, Tizard and Hughes, wonderful researchers, showed that kids engage in the most what they call episodes of intellectual search. That is conversations that are exploration, exploring topics, seeking information, sort of inquiring about things when they were at meal times and other parts of the day when they didn't have a goal. And imagine how little time in contemporary classrooms there is for doing things that don't have a goal.
Right.
And so the way I would put it, based on Tizard and Hughes, is that curiosity takes time. And it also takes room for people, for the reasons we've already talked about. You can't force yourself to be curious about what someone else tells you to be curious about. Yes, grown-ups can make something so interesting that you will be curious about them. I'm not suggesting that teachers have no role to play in sparking curiosity or making material that's important for kids to encounter more interesting, making it stickier so they're likely to be curious about it. All of that is true. But it's also the case that kids need a chance to pursue what spontaneously makes them curious. And I cannot tell you how many times I've watched in classrooms really great teachers, warm, loving teachers, and also some indifferent teachers or whatever, burned out teachers. But across the board, teachers who have to pull a kid back from the moment when they're most curious because they want to get them back on task.
Right. Because they're being evaluated on the basis of meeting those goals and standards and benchmarks, which some of them even are forced to put on the wall.
Exactly.
So they don't have enough time. The curriculum is too standardized.
That's right.
The curriculum is imposed on them. So the teacher has very limited autonomy to be able to promote and support the autonomy of the kids. These are all different reasons. Plus, in addition to that, many aspects of the curriculum are really closed rather than open. The curriculum is not just imposed, but it's also closed in the sense that it's about right answers rather than discovery. Like, it would be a problem if we had to rush, but it would be different if we rushed through exploration-based assigned curriculum, right?
I guess so, although that tortures me too. I do. I think rushing kids is just terrible, actually.
Yeah.
But I will also add that let's focus on the positive for a minute, because in my visits, this not for the curiosity research, but for my work on kindergarten, I visited classrooms across the whole country, and I saw some really great classrooms. And those classrooms, and those classrooms also had the same constrictions on them. So you could ask yourself, I love to do this, what is going right in that classroom? Because it's easy to find, if it gets too easy to look at what's wrong. This is true for scientists too. You can always find what's wrong with another person's experiment, but it's way more fun to think what's right about that experiment that I could learn from or copy. And I feel the same way about classrooms and teachers. So what were those teachers doing? One thing is they themselves were curious people. Now, one thing we could do as a society is make the curiosity of our teachers a more important, prominent feature when we're thinking about who to hire. And we could think about fostering curiosity in the programs that teachers go to become, certified and educated, whatever, licensed to teach. Because when I used to do workshops on curiosity with teachers, I often would start a workshop by saying, what's the thing that you have the most burning curiosity about these days? And what I found remarkable is that almost all the teachers assumed I wanted to know what they were curious about education.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very hard for them to shift gears. They just couldn't believe I might be asking them what they were curious about in any part of their lives.
They're not asked about that very often. So, and in fact, you've also pointed out that that contagion effect with kids becoming more curious around curious adults is even more powerful for those who seem to have less curiosity to begin with.
Exactly. So children who seem intrinsically less curious are much more responsive.
When we're wanting to promote curiosity, how much of that is accounted for by the teacher modeling it, the contagion effect we were talking about, as opposed to what she's teaching and how she's teaching?
So great. A lot. A lot has to do with modeling. And, like you used the word contagion. With curiosity, curiosity is contagious between children and between adults and children. And we don't know enough about it to know how different the mechanisms are. And I don't think the audience listening to this necessarily will care much about that difference. But curious adults model it in two ways. They model it by being curious themselves and free to pursue their own curiosity in front of kids. And I want to get back to a thing about that in a minute. But they also model it just by showing interest in various children's curiosity. And encouraging it, not in a sort of boring, oh, and how did you learn that? And where did you learn that? And oh, how interesting, but in a genuine way. Kids are really good bullshit detectors. So there's a really good reason for helping teachers connect to their own curiosity.
Eleanor Duckworth said that when teachers show genuine interest in kids' thinking, the kids show more interest in their own thinking.
Absolutely. And that is such a well-known phenomenon in human beings that other people's response to us has such a profound impact on us. But you also might be curious, not just in the child's thinking, that's a wonderful form of curiosity, but you might be just interested in something. And the thing you're really interested in as a teacher is they're going to see that there are things you don't know about that you want to know about. And they're going to watch and see how you learn about the things you don't know about. So allowing yourself, making your own thinking process visible to your students, you being the teacher, is a very powerful teaching technique. And that goes to the how part. Rather than a perfect script for how to ask the perfectly lively question and use the perfectly lively visuals or whatever, you could just be genuinely interested in something. And I think one of the reasons that it's hard to encourage teachers to do that is because many of them, through no fault of their own, are encouraged by their whole educational experience and then their training as teachers to think that their job is to know things. When really, some of the time, your job is to show your students how to not know something and then want to know it.
And the other way that this bleeds into that second category I laid out of pedagogy or the execution is, I guess, connected to what you were calling horizontal modeling, which means structuring a classroom for social interaction.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's so wonderful to hear, I have two of my grandchildren are the same age. One's just about to be 6 and the other's just 6. And they're close because they live right next door to each other. They're cousins. And they get to talk and play together a lot. And I get to listen to them a lot. And they're genuinely interested in one another's thoughts. And they argue about things already, like matters of knowledge and fact. But they also want to know what one another thinks about things. And you have to give kids you have to foster that actively. And it's not the same as everybody raising their hand and telling the teacher what they think the answer to a question is. And I saw a lot of this in the really good classrooms that I visited. Kids talking to each other. Sometimes in circle time, they're whispering to each other, and what they're whispering is trying to find out a little more about what the kid next to them is thinking or why they said what they said. Like it's there. It's not absent. It's just not always sort of emphasized in a good way by teachers. I want to get back to something I was going to say before. Oh, and this is a perfect moment to follow up on it. I think that one of the things people can misunderstand me about, but misunderstand more generally in this topic is it's not just about making classrooms more playful or more open or being one of the things that drives me most crazy is when people talk about a structured classroom versus an unstructured classroom. You can't put people in a room together. There are very few circumstances in which that will lack structure. People create structure, they generate it, and kids generate an enormous amount of structure with each other. They're even, they're equal, or they're unequal, or they're competing, or they're in a conversation, or they're working towards a shared goal. I mean, they make plans. We know that. They structure things. And so I'm not talking about an unstructured classroom because there's no such thing. It's a question of what kind of structure you want. And one of the things that can get easily lost in a conversation about curiosity in classrooms is the importance of the role of the teacher. And it's not only in modeling curiosity or making room for curiosity. It also quickly becomes helping children become more deliberate and more aware of how they pursue their curiosity. Learning the difference between a question that can be answered with experimentation and a question that you only can consult yourself about, like, who do I love? Or which flavor ice cream do I like? I mean, matters of opinion and personal taste. Then there's the huge, I would say it's one of the most important purposes, should be one of the most important goals of education, giving kids better tools for satisfying their curiosity and getting better at evaluating when their curiosity on a particular topic is fairly satisfied or where they can go next with that interest. So it's not as if shifting the focus towards curiosity means giving up the importance of good teachers. The opposite.
And in fact, it sheds light on that third category of the curriculum itself, which involves helping them understand those concepts, as well as other aspects that you've written about that I don't think we're going to have time to get into here, about what promotes curiosity in terms of the content of the lesson, which includes complexity, controversy, a middle level of difficulty that's neither too hard nor too easy, a balance between novelty and familiarity, and so on. All of that.
Yeah, your audience can't see me nodding away at what you're saying, but yes.
Well, thank you for describing your nodding. Before we take just a few minutes at the end to talk about your new kindergarten project, I just want to ask you about something I've noticed where I suddenly made a connection among different things throughout your writings, Susan. And you did a little bit of this now, which is you, in various ways, say, people seem to be happy with X in classrooms as a goal, but even though that sounds good, it's really not enough. So, for example, you begin by saying a lot of teachers really aren't helping kids to promote and achieve a degree of mastery with what they're learning. They're just looking for compliance. Kids who do what they're told. But even mastery really isn't enough. At one point you say, because it's not the same as genuine engagement with the learning. And then at another point, you say, you know what, even engagement isn't enough because that's not the same thing as inquiry or curiosity. So throughout your work, in various ways, you take even the groovy stuff and you say, let's think harder about this. Cooperative learning, that's not always enough. Project-based learning doesn't always achieve our goals. Hands-on learning, really nice, caring teachers. In each case, at different points, you say, push harder. Is that a fair assessment of what you're reading?
I don't know. I don't know if that makes me sound like a troublemaker.
A good kind.
Oh, is it? I wouldn't. It's a great question, actually. I believe you, Alfie.
Well, I've got the receipts.
You read my work more recently than I have, and probably seen patterns I'm not aware of. I do think that it's easy to get trapped right now in a very binary view of education.
Mm-hmm.
You're either, the classic word for it is progressive,
Yeah.
or you're results-based or testing-oriented or skills-based. I don't know quite what the right word is for that group because I'm always put in the progressive group. And yet there are a lot of things about ideas that were first promoted, let's say, well, who knows when they were first promoted, but let's say in more recent years in the 1960s, that I don't agree with. And I don't want to be pigeonholed. And why don't I want to be? Partly I just don't like to, but also because I think what's the optimistic way to put this? There's room for everybody to think in better ways about education, myself included, to question our old commitments and I'm a psychologist. I love research. I think there's still stuff we don't know about how kids' thinking unfolds. I'm just, like I said, on the precipice of doing this work that I think is really new. It's certainly new to me, and it's opening my eyes to some things I never thought about. So the good news is I think there's still stuff we have to learn about education and about the developing mind, children's minds, that would help us help them flourish and help society flourish if more people could flourish in that way. So yes, I guess it's not because I want to, what's that old expression? Cast shade on everything?
But let's just give me 1 to 2 sentences on each of these. Why is engagement of students with the curriculum not enough?
Because you could be really engaged and not learning anything, not getting better at it. I think it's necessary to be engaged, but I don't think it's sufficient.
Okay.
You could I get very engaged in chopping celery. It's giving me chopped celery, but it's not teaching me anything new. And school is for learning new things.
Okay.
So that's
what about hands-on learning? Why is that not enough?
Oh, because it's mind-on learning that I want. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes about John Dewey, biggest misinterpretations of John Dewey.
Right. Okay. What about project-based learning?
Same. A project could be an enjoyable activity that's not really intellectually rich, that isn't helping kids or sort of spurring kids to expand what they know or how they think or how they interact with others. You're the one that reminded me, what did you say? That it's from somebody, Lillian Katz, I think. Yeah. A color is not a project. I mean,
yeah, right. So orange is not a theme. Yeah.
Orange. Yeah. Fantastic.
She's the one who talks about the difference between an intellectual and a merely academic classroom.
And I would add to that, I would make a distinction between intellectually engaging and physically engaging.
And cooperative learning, having kids in groups, not enough. Why?
It just can go bad in so many ways if someone's not skillfully keeping an eye on it and helping to sort of steer it. I think we now know that putting people together in groups doesn't, I can think of some very obvious examples. I'll take January 6th.
Okay, enough said.
Groups aren't just inherently a good thing.
Right. I'm mindful of a limited time we have left, but I want to ask you about your kindergarten project. You visited 29 kindergartens in 13 states.
Yeah.
And that represented a bit of a shift for you. Instead of focusing on a topic like curiosity, you focused on a particular age. So you describe the amazing intellectual growth of children around that age, the capacity for asking really big questions. And then you write, so what happens to children's newfound capacity to think their thoughts once they get to kindergarten? It depends on the kindergarten. And of 29 classrooms, you said there were 4 that had a determination to fan the flames of their students' mental lives.
Yes.
Say briefly what you found to describe that range and how they differed from the other 25.
So what really separated some of the classrooms on this dimension, because as you know, I talk about a lot of other things that vary across the schools and the classrooms rather, but on this dimension, it really had to do with teachers who had an idea about their students, that their students had lively minds that were worth developing. And, when we talk about preparing teachers or educating teachers, I think we just spend far too little energy helping them develop their own idea about the children they're working with. One of the most remarkable things in my journey across the country was that I asked every single teacher, so what do you hope for by the end of the kindergarten year for the students in your classroom? What are your goals? And every single teacher said to me, no one's ever asked me that before.
Oh, how depressing.
And I thought, no one cares what your ideas are.
Yeah.
So that means in graduate school, they're not learning to build up. Someone's telling them what they should think
That's right.
should be the goal of education. But you can't be, William James said, master your topic so well as a teacher and learn everything you can and then throw it all away and let spontaneity take over when you're in the classroom. That's in his book, James Talks to Teachers. And I'm not advocating throwing all your plans out the window when you get in the classroom at all. But I do think you have to be a real person in the classroom. And part of being a real person when you're a teacher is having really thought about what your idea about children is and what your idea about what can happen in the year is. And so those teachers really had a very visible, embodied, I guess that's a very observable belief that their children's minds that's what they wanted to focus on, and that a main job they had was to help each child develop their capacity to think.
And how impressed or tickled you were with a given classroom was not predictable based on race and class, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things I wrote about this in the beginning of the book that I was worried about is that my book would slowly end up just echoing what many other people have very importantly said, that we suffer from terrible inequities and schools are punished through racism, or children are punished through racism. And one of the things, all of that is true. I'm not disagreeing with it. But I think it's 3 of the really best classrooms I saw were in schools that had lots of low-income kids, and at least in 2 of those schools where kids were, subjected to terrible racism in their communities and in their society, not necessarily in their school. And I saw some very privileged, very sort of racially sort of calm, or I don't know what the word would be, other schools where all the obvious pluses of security and wealth and nice equipment and good test scores and everything, where nothing was happening for those children, personally or intellectually. So I didn't see, racism and poverty are enemies of education, and they're enemies of children. But in and of themselves, they don't explain why some schools are good and some classrooms really thrive and other classrooms seem quite deadened. And a lot more than you might think rests on the teacher's ability, the teacher's ideas about children and other certain, I can't go into it now, it would take too much time, kind of capacities and orientation. And I would add one last thing. The thing is, virtually all 5-year-olds are really nice and really irresistible. And really open. They want to learn. They want to be friends. They want grown-ups to like them. There are a few that are not like that have deep troubles that get in their way. But most 5-year-olds are just a dream come true to teach. So, which makes the weaknesses of our system even more painful.
Yeah. And you looked also at the non-intellectual, the social, moral aspects of the classrooms. And in some places, you found an emphasis on order above all.
Yes.
Not just structure, but control, where
That's right.
Order is not just a means to be able to teach effectively, but as Linda McNeil at Rice University pointed out in some high schools, that's really the objective. That's the goal. The kind of place where when you walk in, they tell you not to interact with the kids as an observer, you got to be thinking, oh, shit, this is not going to be a good classroom. The place where no object is out of place, the kids are told not to talk and so on. You strain in your book not to be too critical in your description of this, except like the word joyless leaks out occasionally, or somebody doesn't realize that when you use a phrase like carefully constructed activities, that's not a good sign, But we're running out of time, but I guess one question that I was really curious about is what degree of correlation was there between the classrooms where there was an emphasis on order and control and a classroom where there wasn't much emphasis on supporting intellectual growth? Or to put it positively, where the social moral stuff you loved and the intellectual stuff you also loved. Did those always go hand in hand?
No, they didn't. So one of the chapters is about love. And the reason I bring that up is in my few talks about this work that I've given so far, public talks, people chafe at the word love. And I'm totally fascinated by that. And at first I thought maybe I shouldn't use the word love. People talk about reciprocal affection and interpersonal this and all these big words. And it was love. And it's a good thing. I'm shocked that people are worried about using the word love in a classroom, because who would want to send their child, or in my case, their grandchild, to a classroom where there wasn't love? I just can't believe there's this. And the talks I've given so far are to other academics and experts. So I'm surprised that people are uncomfortable with the word love. But I also bring it up because one of the most loving classrooms I saw was also kind of tepid intellectually. I mean, a lot of the kids there were really happy and really needed that love. But there were also some kids in there who were visibly restless, hungry for more interesting things to talk about or do. And so it was hard. Those kids benefited from love too. But I could see they wished, they yearned for something else, and they weren't getting in that classroom. But God knows that classroom had love.
But love is similar to a nice teacher, which elsewhere you've been careful to distinguish between the promotion of curiosity, right?
I don't think love and nice are the same at all.
Okay, but neither is the same as active, thoughtful promotion of social and moral development.
I didn't really talk about moral development. I talked about community and self going hand in hand. And I suppose any classroom that emphasizes community in some way is instilling a sense of responsibility for one another. So in that sense, but I don't think I used the word moral too much.
Well, let's talk about the promotion of kids' social autonomy and values or something like that, as opposed to just intellectual growth. Is that not a useful distinction for you?
Well, no, it's interesting to me. So just remind me, though, because now I'm stuck thinking about whether I should have included something on morals. But what are you asking? Whether those things always went together or didn't always go together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm borrowing from this sort of Piagetian talk where they put social and moral together for that form of development and what it means to help kids become autonomous in that respect. And they distinguish that from intellectual development. So that's why I was curious where, again, we'll do a 2x2 table, right, where there's 4 cells of high, low on intellectual and high, low on, just call it social or non-intellectual if you prefer to leave out moral.
You're asking me if those were related to one another, correlated?
Yeah.
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't want a listener to get the impression from this that at the end of the day, there were only 4 nice classrooms or 4 classrooms where you'd send your kid.
Okay.
There were 4 classrooms that were so wonderful because they sort of encompassed all of the promises that the book is about. The book is about these promises that teachers make to their classrooms make to their students. And some classrooms only delivered on one of them. Some delivered only on one and not in a very nice way, but they delivered on it. And some made and kept several of the promises. And then these 4 made and kept virtually all of them. The thing that's interesting about order is that there's a way that teachers could make order a goal, a priority, that did not get in the way of the other goals like love and intellectual engagement. They went hand in hand in some classrooms. So I'm not sure in this case. I loved your first 4-part grid, but this one
doesn't work.
I'm not sure fits because maybe I just haven't done enough thinking about it. I think the thing that I liked about the promises that I identify for the book is that they can be standalone or go together. And part of it is that it's not just the promise, it's how it's implemented. It's how the promise is kept that matters so much.
So you were evaluating implicitly or explicitly these classrooms against a set of standards, some criteria for what great early childhood education should look like. But did anything you saw in those classrooms change your sense of what those criteria should be and what a good way of teaching is? And if so, what?
Love.
More love. You hadn't thought about that before.
I just saw it totally differently as a function of the classrooms. And then this realization, another thing that totally surprised me was I originally wanted to have 2 chapters, 2 sections, one on self, how kids get to be more of who they are, and another chapter or section focus on community. And in observing in the classrooms, I realized that where there was one, there was the other, and they always went hand in hand. You can't maybe that's the difference between group and community. Any classroom's a group, but not every classroom, and you can get groups of kids to behave well towards one another, but that doesn't mean they work to establish shared goals or suppress their goal for the other kid's goal or whatever. So self and community, the way in which they went together, I learned from doing this project. And then the way in which, the other thing that I talk about in the chapter on the mind, the intellectual lives of students in this book, is the way in which some teachers constantly bring the outside world into the classroom. And I don't mean it the way Dewey meant it, although I loved the way he meant it. I don't mean by bringing in activities that represent or capture the activities of communal life, carpentry in this world would be programming in this era. I don't know what it would be anymore, but filmmaking, podcast, TikTok. But I don't mean the occupations. I mean that some teachers had a way of weaving little bits and pieces of life in the bigger world. There's an example of a teacher talking about finding a cracked teacup in a china shop when she's teaching a lesson about the letters CH, I think. China. She tells this story that seems out of nowhere, but it's wonderful. And it comes naturally to her. She did it all day long because clearly her implicit idea of education is that you're helping the kids have a wider world in their heads.
Did those affect, or did something else affect what would be on your list of recommendations for a kindergarten teacher who came to you saying, how do I create a terrific classroom?
Yes. And it would also change what I would think of as putting into a graduate program for teachers, which I have given a lot of thought to many years ago and am rethinking now because of this experience. I would say be more of who you are. I would say bring yourself into the classroom. Maybe that's what I mean, because I don't mean be more of who you are, like yell at the kids if you feel like yelling at them, or tell them everything about your life, or love them as if they're your kids. I don't mean any of those things, but I mean bring who you are into the classroom and think about which parts of who you are you're going to bring into the classroom. Like, be a little aware of that. Allow yourself to be curious in the classroom. Allow yourself to share what you love with your students. Because talk about a good way to get kids to be interested in a topic. If you bring to class the things you love and are interested in, then you will bring that material or project or activity to life for them. Allow yourself to be in relationships with them. Because the idea of sort of trying to strip classrooms of that is just terrible to me. And, it leads to a topic we're not going to talk about, which is the way in which AI can or cannot replace humans as teachers. But let's just stick with 5-year-olds. They need to be around humans.
And when they're around teachers who are being themselves and freely bubbling over with the things that excite them, they are helping kids to tap into excitement about those topics and ideas, but also, which brings us back full circle in our conversation, to modeling curiosity itself and helping kids to be around adults and realize, hey, it's cool to want to know more about this. And Susan, you've helped me to learn more about this and to trigger my thinking in all sorts of interesting and delightful ways. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and my listeners.
You're welcome. I could talk to you for hours. You know that. So this was a pleasure.
Take care.